So today's 15-minute Feature Friday, we're going to be talking about roles and privileges in Milestone. So this is an area that most of our customers, if they don't just have more than just one or two users on a system that are admin users, almost all of our customers are going to run up against this and need to be able to know how to set this up. And us working within Milestone, even if you're not in sales or even if you're not on the pre-sales team or whatnot, but it's helpful to have a general understanding of how this works and to be able to explain to people the nature of how the privileges work and give them some ideas on how to set it up. So that's what I figured we'll be talking about today a little bit. So specifically what I want to go over is how the admin privileges work. We're going to touch on how admins have God powers in the system, what the difference between the overall security tab versus the device tab is. I call it the blunt axe privileges versus the scalpel privileges, and how you add users into roles, and briefly touch on the differences between roles and smart client profiles. Not going to get too deep into smart client profiles. We'll save that for another 15-minute Feature Friday that's going to be coming up soon, but I did want to touch on that a little bit with regard to the differences between them. So we'll go ahead and jump into it here. So here we've got our management client software running. So first thing to notice here is when we want to set up a new user, we've got our basic users tab here. So these users that are in this section here are nothing more than a credential, just a login and password. They have no powers, no authority to do anything, is simply a credential for the system. These are local users that have nothing to do with Active Directory. So even if you've got users that are exclusively pretty much using Active Directory, it's still helpful. I still suggest to people that they set up maybe a local user as sort of an emergency access system, or maybe they have a situation where they want to bring a contractor in to add a camera or manipulate set up a new camera or set up, change the system around a little bit, and they don't want to go through the hassle of giving that contractor an Active Directory login. So this is also a convenient way to give somebody outside of their organization temporary access to the system without having to deal with the Active Directory aspect of doing so. So I've got a user here that I've set up called test user, and that user I've gone and associated to a role. So I have one role in here specifically that we're going to be working with today that's I've called nothing, add, or deny. So what we've got here within this role, I've defined what smart client profile it's going to belong to, and I have a unique smart client profile that's not my default set up for that. And the way you add a user into that is you just go to your users and groups tab and you add the user in. So if I delete this user from here and we want to add a new user into it, you click the role and you click on add and you can say basic user. Now, if you were going to add a Windows user, I'm not on the domain controller with this, so I can't choose this option. But if you click this and you're on the domain controller, you get the familiar window that pops up that gives you the option of adding in an Active Directory user or group with the little check name button. Anybody who works in Active Directory is very familiar with that interface. It's really comfortable for them, and they understand immediately how that works. And that's how you would add a Windows user or a role into, or Windows user or group into a role within Milestone. But today we're going to be doing basic user. So I'm going to choose basic user, choose test user, click OK. So now this test user is now a member of this nothing, add, or deny role. So that's how you make that association between the two of them. So first off, you'll see if you're an administrator on the system, all these tabs are grayed out over here. So this is a little confusing for people sometimes when they first jump into the system. They're like, well, I'm an administrator. I should be able to have control over this stuff. Well, administrators have God powers in the system. So they gray all this stuff out because you can do anything in the system, and to give the tabs on here access when you can do anything at all is kind of redundant. It's so they don't even give you the choice of doing anything here because you can do anything. The only sort of exception to that is under users or under the info tab here. Smart administrators can have different smart client profiles, so you can impose some restrictions to the smart client software by altering the smart client profile for an administrator. But as far as just sheer privileges within the system, it's grayed out because they can do anything. So our first tab over here that we wanted to touch on, the overall security tab. This is, again, what I call kind of the blunt axe privileges. So here is where you can give privileges to a user with broad strokes. So for example, on management server, if you want to give them the ability to just do anything, add and delete cameras or manipulate the system, actually that would be under here, you can do so. So we're going to focus more on the camera tab here just because it's more kind of easy to understand and applicable. So my default role here, I haven't got anything selected in these broad privileges. So what that means by default, we default to a deny. So if nothing is checked here, this user is not allowed to do anything. So then why do we have this deny column? That's kind of confusing. If the default is a deny? The answer is I'm not really sure. The only thing I can really think of, I can demonstrate here. So if I select a deny for full control and we save that and we go over to our actual device tab, all these options over here are going to be grayed out. So the overall security tab takes precedence. It's a higher priority. So if you explicitly deny, then you deny them the ability to even have the option of adding privileges back at a lower level over here down on the lower tab. So maybe you've got something that's particularly sensitive or particularly high sensitive area. Then this is a way that you can restrict access and prevent people from being able to do that. Steve may have the answer for that here. So as Steve's, we got sort of specifically for when a member is in multiple roles, one particular role should block the privileges regardless of what the other role is doing. Okay, that's cool. Nice. All right. But what we're going to do here is I'm going to take away the explicit deny. And what if we did an explicit allow? It's going to be the same thing. So if we save this over here and we go back to our device tab, these again are grayed out, but they're all checked and grayed out. So we've explicitly, with a really broad stroke, given full access to all the cameras by doing that, and we've taken away the access of altering it on a lower tier down there. So again, for this example here, we're going to leave these not selected. So we're defaulting to a deny. And now when we go over to the device tab, these are unchecked. So you'll see these cameras here, this user doesn't have any access to any of the cameras that are in the exterior camera folder. And you can do this based on grouping. So this is what most people are going to do. They'll control privileges by group. But if you want to drill down and go to a specific camera, you can control privileges on a camera by camera level as well. So in this example, we've given this user the ability to read, view live, do playback, and do smart search. And you'll see my all camera views sort of has this partial selection in here is because one of these cameras crosses over and is also in my all camera group. So this is indicating that there's some cameras that are given access in here, but not all of them. So what do these things mean? So read is the ability to say, even know this camera exists in the system. If this isn't checked, the user has no awareness to that camera being in existence. They don't see it at all in the smart client, not the name, not anything. View live is exactly what it sounds like, the ability to view live video. And if you've got our higher tier products, I believe this is a corporate feature or expert in corporate, you have the ability to choose when they're allowed to view live video. Actually, I think this one may be on lower tier as well. It's the playback one. But so you have the ability to say, okay, we're gonna just always allow this person to view live video, or we can restrict it and say they're only allowed to access it during business hours if we set up a time profile that covers that range of business hours. Same thing with playback. We have the ability to view playback, and again, you can restrict that to a specific time profile, or you could even limit it to, again, this is an upper tier feature, you can limit it to within a range. So even though we're storing a month's worth of video, this user only has access to, say, the last 30 minutes worth of recordings. Then we got read sequences, do smart search. You want to be able to read bookmarks, even see those bookmarks, edit them, create them, delete them. So this is where you can control these privileges. So if we go with this and we click save here, we're going to be able to log in as our test user. And we'll see that we have access to these cameras, and we don't have any visibility to the other cameras on the system. So because we've restricted access to only those specific cameras that we wanted to have the ability to access. So if you're sharp and paying attention, you'll notice that we're missing the setup button up here. So where did that go? We don't have any ability to go into setup mode. The reason for that is I restricted it within the Smart Client profiles. So if we go over here and we look at our no setup Smart Client profile, we'll see that this is the role that's using that Smart Client profile. And if I go into my setup tab, we've restricted and made that button unavailable to be able to be accessed. So if I were to turn it back on and click save, and then we relog back in with the Smart Client again, now we've got our setup button back. So this is kind of demonstrating the difference here between Smart Client profiles and roles, in that Smart Client profiles is altering the appearance, the visibility of buttons or elements within the Smart Client software, whereas in roles, you're controlling what features they have access to within the Smart Client software. One of the distinction you may or may not ever run up against is if you're using the SDK integration, Smart Client profiles aren't going to impact your SDK's access. That's going to be something that's handled by roles. That's privileges within the system, whereas Smart Client Profiles is specifically for the Smart Client Profile and doesn't really impact much else on the system. So that is that component on it. And one other thing, while touching on Smart Client Profiles, one of the other things that I will normally always do when I'm in here, just incidentally for Smart Client Profiles, is first thing I'll do is under Advanced or under General, I'll restrict these access here, because if these things get changed from their default settings, it can really screw up the performance of your recording server. Sorry, the screen's flashing on the other screen here. The other thing that I'll often change on here right off the bat is I'll restrict the layouts that people are able to do. So you have the option of going in here and creating a 100 camera layout. Now, very few people's computers, smart client computers, can handle displaying 100 cameras at the same time. So to save people from themselves, I'll usually restrict these higher camera count layouts and not even give them the option of choosing those. So just to kind of touch on that just a little bit. And that, I think, is bringing us pretty much to the end of what I wanted to cover with regard to this. Do we have any questions or anything today? Threw a bunch of information out there real quick. So we've got some comments in the group here. Anybody want to, if there's anything in here relevant, so you guys aren't waiting for me to read all this stuff here. If you want to unmute and just chime in, if there's anything we want to add to this, feel free to do so.
Hey, Jason, I just had a quick question. So I remember at the kickoff at the beginning of the year, there was a mention that we were looking to separate that God power, basically, that if someone has administrator rights to Windows on the management server, that they wouldn't automatically have administrative rights. I don't know if you would know, but does anyone know if that's still being planned, or if that was going to happen?
That is something I did want to point out. Yeah, so Windows admins will also have God powers in here, and sometimes that's an issue. We had a hospital customer that was a significant issue for them because they gave out a lot more Windows admin rights, and they wanted people to have access God powers in the system. I think we came up with a workaround for that. Somebody can probably chime in and explain what that was. I don't remember the details of it, but there is, as I understand it, a way that we can sort of work around that problem. I don't know if they were actually going to bake in a permanent fix or not for that.
Cool. Well, it's good to know at least that there's possibly an option, because I've definitely come across that before and thought I remember that at the kickoff. But
yeah, I'm almost certain we do have a workaround for that. So if that is a real big issue for a particular customer, let us know. We can dig that back up again. Like I said, I think we figured out some way of circumventing that, but I just don't recall what it was off the top of my head. If anybody knows, wants to unmute and chime in, then that's awesome.
Alex, I know they mentioned it at kickoff, but I'm not aware of it being implemented, though. They have implemented some of the password complexity requirements and didn't really advertise it, so it could be there, and we don't know. I don't think it is, though.
Yeah, I have noticed that if you are on the Active Directory and whatever password complexity requirements are policy for that domain get applied even to local users on the Milestone account. So it changes the password you're allowed to do even for a Milestone-only user. It follows that same password complexity requirement. I've run into that several times. Okay. Somebody else is typing in here. Golden. Feel free to unmute and go ahead and chime in if you want to.
Sure. Never really delved into it, but is there a way with roles to mass clone? Like, for instance, if a company has a lot of operators and you want them all to have the same things, is there a way in the management client to mass make roles to make them all like the same, so it's easier for the person on the management client?
You can do a copy role if you want
sweet.
to. So if we wanted to duplicate that, then you get an option of renaming it. And so now we have a duplicate here that's based on that original one, and then we can kind of rinse and repeat. Now, I don't think you can do multiples at the same time. Yeah, it's not letting me shift click, but that's still going to be a huge time saver rather than have to go through and set up every unique one.
Oh, good deal.
All right, best thing to do is set up your roles how you like, and then new Active Directory groups. Yep, very much so. So yeah, and that most of your users are going to be associating these roles with Active Directory groups. So for example, if you're a school district and you have an administrator in Campus A, you'll set up a role in Milestone that is access for Campus A and mate those two together. So as people come and go from Campus A, they gain or lose their privileges to those specific cameras. That's going to really be the lion's share how these things get handled. Is most of our users are using Active Directory and tying these things together, so they're not constantly having to go into the management client and manage and add and delete users. Very much so. Okay, cool. Well, that is our 15 minutes. So if you guys have suggestions for future 15-minute Feature Fridays, as usual, please feel free to email them in. We will be happy to prioritize those suggestions and give those precedence. We keep track of the requests, and we welcome suggestions and look forward to seeing you guys on next week's 15-minute Feature Friday. Have a good day.
Thanks, Jason.